Thank you, everyone, for being here today on time, on dot, despite the time change in Europe. So good morning for y'all. Thanks for waking up early, and good afternoon to all our colleagues in Asia, and also good late afternoon or evening to those joining in from US or the American continent. Thank you. Thanks for your time, and I hope that we will have a fruitful 2 hours for this dialogue session on corporate insights for reducing the environmental impact of packaging. So I look forward for a good exchange today. I hope we don't have much technical glitches. So to start off, just introducing myself, my name is Jaya. So I'm the National Coordinator for Malaysia. I'm based in Malaysia too, and I will be moderating for our session today, and together co-supporting with me is Kunsara. You have heard her earlier, so she will be supporting with all these slide managements and also the chat box. You also heard Gita earlier. She's my colleague based in Jakarta, and Sarah's based in Thailand. So before we start, again reminding, kindly see the chat box for your respective translation links, and you can join to listen in your language. Otherwise, just a kind reminder again, this series will be recorded and uploaded in YouTube so that we could share more with others who are interested. And also we will share the PowerPoint presentations in our website that you can download and use it. So thank you again for your time, and going through our program today, we will start the short introduction of our project and the need of why we are organizing this series. We would also will be listening the technical aspect, the sharing on life cycle analysis and plastic, these technical studies and analysis from various presenters today, and later we will also listen from the industry itself, who are the actual players. So, so we have many programs laid down. We have many speakers, so we would like to be on time. So without further delay, I would invite our team lead, project leader, Mr. Christopher Brick, to give our opening speech. Yeah.
Thank
Please.
you very much. Thank you very much, Thea, and welcome also from my side. I would like to share with you a little bit information about the CAPC project. So next slide, please. Because I see that we have many colleagues from our project, but also people who may not be familiar with the CAPC project. So CAPC stands for Collaborative Actions to Prevent Single-Use Plastics in Southeast Asia. And we are a regional project financed by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment. And our duration is we run until
Christopher, 1 second. Do you have the fan near you? I think we hear the wind. Or
Oh,
somebody has the mic on.
let me
Can you
mute
please
everybody.
mute?
So I muted everybody. Is it better now? Yeah, sounds better. Okay, great. So picking up, our project runs until March 2023, and we implement in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. What is CAPC about? You see here a visualization by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that shows the ambition in terms of the plastics economy, that shows a very, very strong secondary raw materials stream in terms of the materials that are being used to produce the plastic products, the packaging, and all the other products made from the polymers. You see inside the reuse circle, so the whole topic of increasing the longevity and durability of products to keep them in the loop as high value products as long as possible. And you see, of course, also a very, very reduced leakage, and mostly the secondary raw material. So what do we do as CAPC in this regard? There are different intervention areas in all three countries, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Together with our partners, we advise on circular economy policy frameworks. So this includes regulatory, economic, and fiscal measures that countries can take. This includes policy frameworks such as eco-design or also eco-labels, design for recycling standards, or topics such as recycled content targets, as to increase the demand and then hopefully also the supply for high value recyclates. And in the reuse section, you see we also support SUP prevention policies on the local level, because if you want to pilot reusable food containers for food delivery, for example, which we do in Malaysia and in Indonesia, it's useful to do that in a small confined space first to get the experience before you roll it out nationwide. Yes, this is broadly the scope of our project, and the dialogue series really is our approach on the one hand to knowledge management, and also to get various perspectives on this topic into the public sphere, because we know that circular economy can only be achieved if government, industry, local businesses, and consumers really work together and change their behaviors and the way the supply chain works. And so this is really supposed to be a forum where on the one hand we get the input from Öko Institute on really the scientific basis on what we're talking about today on the whole topic of life cycle assessments as a tool for identifying good packaging solutions. But also hear from the practitioners, hear from the industry, but also from the NGOs, what the respective perspectives are. And we have done this in a number of topics, basically all the topics that we cover within the CAPC project. You see here, we already talked about the recycled content in plastic packaging applications. In September and October, it was all about design for recycling, recyclability, and you can find those dialogue events on the GIZ Thailand YouTube channel. We will post the link into the chat later on. Today is the corporate insights on LCA-based choices for reducing the impact, the environmental impact on packaging. In December, it will be about bio-based, biodegradable plastics. And then January on economic and fiscal measures to reduce packaging waste. And we close the dialogue series in February with the role and scope of municipalities. And we will share here in that session on February also from our pilot projects in Shah Alam and Phuket and Jakarta on what the implementation has achieved there. So with this overview over CAPC and the upcoming dialogue series, I wish us all a very insightful event and hand back to my colleague Jaya. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Again, apologies for these popping messages. We try to do some intervention, but it's still popping, so please bear with us for a while. So for next speaker, we would like to invite Mr. Siddharth Prakash. He is our senior researcher from Eco Institute. It's a German research and consultancy agency who works very closely with GIZ and with CAPC, our project. And for today, he's presenting a very new published study. I think that we just published it very recently as well on material choices for environmental friendly packaging. So it's on analysis on existing LCE studies. Yes, Siddharth, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jaya, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody today. It's a pleasure speaking here at this dialogue series. My name is Siddharth Prakash. I work in the Department Sustainable Consumption and Production of the Eco Institute, which is an independent non-profit institution giving advice to policymakers, companies, and civil society organizations on a wide range of issues related to sustainability. And here in Southeast Asia, we have been involved in a series of projects on the topic of sustainable consumption and production, together with the GIZ. So today I'm going to be presenting a summary, or let's say the overarching conclusions of the analysis of existing life cycle assessment studies for a number of packaging products. And you can see that we had a look at 5 different packaging products. So shopping bags, beverage containers, beverage cups, takeaway food packaging, and meat packaging. And we looked how these packaging types perform in terms of their environmental impact, looking into various environmental impact categories, so greenhouse gas emissions, but not only greenhouse gas emissions, but also others like eutrophication, acidification, etc. We also looked at how these studies have dealt with the aspects of recyclability and how the reusability component of the packaging types have been considered in terms of assessing their environmental impacts. So I have to say that the report is based on the existing LCA studies, and it is not a study which we did capturing primary data. So it's an analysis of the existing landscape of studies on packaging types, the life cycle assessment studies. And of course, the different studies are not comparable with each other, because these different studies have been done in different geographical areas and different at different times by different authors using probably different databases. So they're not comparable with each other. So their results have to be interpreted very carefully in each individual context. What we have done in this overarching analysis, please go back one slide. Thank you. In this study, which we recently published, is to draw some, let's say, overarching conclusions, so that there are some universal, let's say, takeaway messages we can have for policy making, and especially for our partners in Southeast Asia, because as you will see in the presentations later on, and also with some examples which I will show in the presentation, that the results of life cycle assessment studies can be very different, and it's not always easy to interpret them when it comes to a wide variety of materials and material combinations and material choices. So what we have tried to do is to draw some overarching conclusions. Some of my fellow speakers may agree to some of these overarching conclusions. Some of the conclusions may be up for contradiction or up for debate. So I'm looking forward to that. I have to say that we know LCAs is a good tool, is a good methodology to also to show trade-offs and potential conflict of interest between the environmental goals, and to identify the hotspots for those environmental categories which are, let's say, in the DNA of the life cycle assessment methodology. So for greenhouse gas emissions, but also for eutrophication, acidification aspects, the methodology is quite well developed, and the data is also quite well for most of the cases. But the studies, the LCA methodology, do not always provide a complete picture, and this is something we will discuss later on as well, and that these studies needs to be supplemented by additional information. For example, information or data or assessment of aspects like hazardous substances, or for example, microplastics or littering. Biodiversity losses are some of the aspects they need additional analysis. So maybe we can start with the series of conclusions. I have drawn 10 conclusions in this studies together with my colleagues, Kevin and Clara. I think they are also part of the debate today. So the first conclusion which we have drawn is that substituting single-use products with other single-use products made from a different material are not always is not always an environmental friendly option holistically, because normally if you look at the different environmental categories of which are captured in the LCA, so replacing one material with a different material might be beneficial for one impact category, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, but may not be beneficial from the perspective of a different environmental category, for example, acidification. So there is a burden shifting, and that needs to be kept in mind. You can see one of the examples that some people think, or normally this is a general perception that paper is always environmental friendlier, single-use paper bag, for instance, than the single-use plastic bags. And this is definitely not the case if you're looking at the GWP, global warming potential, and also, for example, water consumption. But of course, on the other side, the paper bag, they show a lower littering potential, for instance, than the single-use plastic bags. So you can already see a trade-off, but overall you can say that although one single-use product may look environmental friendly or preferable than the other one in one-to-one comparison, all single-use products have a high burden on resource consumption. Please, next slide. So the second major conclusion is that the reusable products in total have a lower environmental impact than single-use products. And in other words, you can say that increasing the reuse rate of packaging products has the highest potential for reducing the environmental impact. So if of course, we have to ensure that the reuse rates of reusable packaging are not lower. They are high enough. And if they are low, if the durable PP bag, for instance, which is given in the example here, is not used 10 to 20 times, it will not have a better, let's say, global warming potential or lower greenhouse gas emissions than a single-use plastic bag. So we have to ensure a high reuse rate for reusable packaging to be environmental friendly. This does not mean that we start promoting single-use products rather than reuse products, because we know that, well, the reuse rates are not high enough until now. The message is here that all of us need to combine efforts and work together in terms of increasing the reuse rates, because if we achieve these high reuse rates, then they are definitely much better in all the impact categories, the reusable packaging, than the single-use products. Next slide, please. So, there is also a perception that, well, the reusable packaging, the takeaway packaging, if it's provided with, let's say, reusable options, then of course additional logistics is required. They need to be transported. These products need to be washed and dried, etc., etc. But the LCS studies show that even though, in general, even though you consider these additional logistics and the transportation, washing and drying cycles several times for reusable packaging, they are still a better option than the single-use products. And we looked at the different examples. I mean, you can see a couple of examples on the slide here. But also, it was interesting to see an example from the US, for instance, where it was modeled that the reusable packaging were washed using quite old dishwashers, for instance, and even there they performed better than the single-use options, of course, provided that the high reuse rate was achieved. So, and we know that if the equipments or the devices, the electronic appliances like the dishwashers are getting even more and more efficient, in many parts of the world, the share of the renewable energies in the electricity mix is increasing. So that means that when it comes to the climate change related impacts, that the performance of the reusable options will even get better in the future. That's what we can expect. But overall, you can say that, well, even if you account for these additional, let's say, steps in the reusable value chain, then even then they are a better choice than the single-use products. The next slide, please. So we know that recycling is a part of the solution, and we require better collection, better recycling technologies, higher recycling rates. There is no doubt about that. But we also know that it is quite a challenge in terms of logistically and technologically organizing the whole recycling infrastructure in a very efficient way. So we know that in many cases, in reality, many materials or many materials which are used in the packaging types, for example, the PP or LDPE or paper. Theoretically, they are recyclable, but in practice, they are not recycled due to various reasons, because of collection losses, because they are contaminated with food waste, etc. And it is very difficult to let's say, break this kind of the complexity chain of the recycling infrastructure. And we know that the materials have a different environmental impact depending upon which waste treatment or recycling option is applied. So for some materials, incineration might be a better option. In other other materials, landfilling may be a better option. So it's and it all depends on the context of the country. And it is, I think it's just too complex and too much of information which needs to be considered in order to take the correct political decisions in terms of the material choices for packaging types. So to cut the long story short, we want to say here is it's important to promote reuse. And of course, recycling is important, but it's even more important to promote reuse because it will reduce the complexity of the political decision making. So this is the fourth conclusion which we have drawn from the study. So the next slide. This is the aspect which I already covered very briefly, that the LCA studies on single-use plastics and packaging do not adequately consider the impacts of hazardous substances, microplastic generation, littering, biodiversity loss, and land use changes. And we know that land use changes are supposed to be one of the biggest contributor to global warming potential. And these aspects are not well addressed in many LCA studies. And if all these aspects are internalized, are considered properly, let's put it that way, then the benefits of reusable products over single-use products would be even more obvious. So, you know, in the previous slides, I've been talking more, giving a more kind of a differentiated picture under which conditions reusable options may be better than the single-use options, you know, increasing the reuse rate, reducing the collection losses, etc. That's all important. But if you also move beyond the aspects of climate change, for instance, and look into these aspects which are mentioned on these slides, it's quite obvious that the reusable options, let's say the non-toxic reusable options, will have a better overall impact. And there are some examples given on this slide, which you can see, for example, the PVC, which is still widely used in the labels of beverage bottles because it's soft, because it's more flexible. But if these products are subjected to, for example, open incineration, which happens in many parts of the world, then of course it will lead to the emission of dioxins, for instance. And these are the aspects which are not always adequately considered in the LCA studies. LCA studies are normally also based on lots of assumptions and lots of scenarios. There are sensitivity analysis which are used to cover more, let's say, a differentiated picture of what is really going on the ground, but still aspects like hazardous substances or as impacts on the human health, for instance, are some aspects which are not adequately considered. One option, I think another example is here that when it comes to reusable options, we know that the material used mostly is more durable, more heavier, so it's less likely to be picked up by the wind, for instance. So that leads to lower littering potential, which is, and littering is one of the major problems in many parts of the world. We know that. And of course, if the material is more durable, a bit heavier, then for at least for non-plastic materials, for instance, the reusable options would not lead to the microplastic problem as well. So there are many benefits of reusable options. So moving forward, we will have a separate dedicated episode within this dialogue series on the topic of bio-based plastic and biodegradable plastic next month. So people who are interested in having a more detailed discussion on that are highly welcome to join that episode as well. What we want to say and what we have seen in the LCA studies, which we analyze, is that the bio-based plastics do not offer advantages in all impact categories over the disposable plastic packaging products. So even there is a burden shifting, and they are definitely not the problem or the solution for against littering. That's what we have to say. And you can see the examples. For instance, we know that bio-based materials might have a lower global warming potential than fossil-based products. For example, in this case of the bag, which the example which is shown on the slide, but they will lead to higher acidification, eutrophication, particulate matter emissions, for instance. So you can already see a trade-off, and an aspect which should definitely not be neglected, and which is a major issue, is that the land use change, if renewable materials or bio-based materials are used for the production, manufacturing of packaging products, the land use change, which may be a result that may occur due to that, is the highest contributor to the global warming potential. And that, of course, would also lead to has the potential to cause land use conflicts, for instance, but also biodiversity loss. If, for example, monoculture plantations are being used to grow material for the production of packaging. So the next slide, please. Okay. So I'll move a bit faster now. So the same applies to biodegradable packaging, which is seen as a solution in many cases, but we know that the advantages are highly overrated, and they're strongly dependent on the context, and there also the material specific characteristics need to be considered. For example, we know that biodegradable packaging, I mean, the decomposition rate is much higher in practice than in the industrial processes. And we also know that if they are mixed with other waste streams, for example, when PLA is mixed with PET, then it causes problem in the recycling because it cannot be separated, and it leads to PLA leads to the degradation of quality of the PET recyclate, for instance. So yeah, moving forward again, just pressing the accelerator now. End-of-life management in a specific context has a significant influence on the environmental performance of a packaging material. So, so depending upon the material, in some cases, let's say landfilling is better. For example, if you see that in the countries where landfilling is a major option and the reuse rate of reusable packaging is low, then the recycled plastic packaging is a better option for the climate, for instance. In other cases, when we use materials like cotton, paper, or starch-based plastics, the countries with incineration are, or let's say the countries where waste management is dominated by incineration, with or without energy recovery, the cotton, paper, or starch-based plastics may be better options for the climate. So it's always very, let's say, dependent on the specific context, and that needs to be considered in the decision making. Next conclusion, please. Yeah, there are several factors which influence the weight of the packaging. So the weight, the size, the use of monomaterials, of course, which is quite important, the energy mix of the production processes, and the waste treatment option I just mentioned. So normally you would say that reducing the weight of the packaging would lead to the lower environmental impact. I think we have a presentation coming on that part as well later on. But of course, if lightweight packaging, for example, is coming at the cost of recyclability, and then these packaging has to be treated, for example, in poorly managed incineration plants where the dioxin filter systems are not well installed or managed, then it may be better to go for a heavier but better recyclable packaging. So even there, again, this material specific choice needs to be put in the overall context of the country, for instance. Next and final conclusion. And the final I would like to mention, and this is also be covered in a separate presentation later on, that the food packaging should be given a special attention in the debate on sustainable packaging solutions, because preventing food waste should be a high priority. So in these cases, I think it's important to extend the shelf life of the food products, because if the shelf life is short and the food is, let's say, not it's leading to, or the packaging or poor packaging choice is leading to food losses, then the impact of the food is, yeah, in that you can say the bacon, for example, has 50 times the higher the carbon footprint of the packaging. So in the end, we are leading to more environmental impacts than saving them. So it's better to consider proper design options. For example, in some cases, it may even be better to go for a multi-layer packaging where the waste management systems are quite well installed in the country, where these packaging can be dealt with, for example, in incineration plants properly, than going for packaging systems which are suboptimal and would lead to food loss. So preventing food waste should be a high priority for the decision making, and this needs to be considered. So that was it. Thanks a lot. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues Clara and Kevin for supporting in carrying out the study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siddharth. So thanks for this insight. I think, again, there's a lot of responsibility for us to rethink how we manage or use our plastic. And then just for everyone, the question and answer session will be arranged a bit later after next two presentations. So if you already have questions, you can also put it in the chat box so that our presenters can also address it. And we can also discuss it later if we have the time. So moving on, let's go to our second presenter, who will explain to us on life cycle analysis and plastics, a blind spot or deliberate I can't pronounce this. Hope I pronounce it correctly. Obfuscation. Welcome, Ms. Satyarupa Shekhar from Asia Pacific Coordinator from Break Free from Plastic Movement. The floor is yours, Ms. Satya. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayashree. And thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to share some insights from our work. I'm just going to pull up my presentation. Is this visible?
Yeah, we could see this. Yes.
Thank you once again. And today I'd like to focus on, to build a little bit further on what Siddharth's presentation was on, which is life cycle assessments and plastics. And really here, what I would like to do is interrogate whether this is really just a blind spot, or are we using a tool to make something more complex? So my position really is the Asia Pacific coordinator for the Break Free from Plastic movement. The Break Free from Plastic movement is a global movement to fight plastic pollution. And we have 11,000 members across the world. The Asia Pacific team, we have 300 core members in all of the countries in Asia, all the way from Afghanistan, China, Japan, and the Oceania. So that's the island countries as well as Australia and Indonesia. And
Ms. Satyapura, I'm sorry. I think the presentation, is it full screen? I'm sorry, I cannot see the whole screen showing.
Yeah,
Not sure if it's just me. Everybody can see fine, right? Okay.
No,
it's
cut off.
Okay, it's cut off.
Maybe restart, like stop sharing the presentation and restart again.
We could see like 70% and maybe like the last line was cut off. Yeah.
No, I think this is it. This is the view that I have seen on my screen.
Yeah, now seems better.
Okay.
Okay, now it's fine. Thank you. Sorry. Okay.
All right. So the Break Free from Plastic movement in Southeast Asia, we also work with policymakers, civil society, media in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, more specifically, but also, of course, in the Philippines and other lower Mekong countries. So I really want to start my presentation with this particular quote from the Pew Charitable Trusts. They released a report last year called Breaking the Plastic Wave, which basically says that by 2040, current industry and government commitments are likely to reduce the annual plastic leakage into the ocean by only 7% relative to business as usual. So what they find is that the results indicate that a far greater scale of action at the system level will be required to really address the challenge of plastic pollution. So building a little bit more on Siddharth's presentation of LCA, I think it's very, very important for us to recognize that this is a tool, and whatever you put into this tool, the kind of data that you put in is the results that you would get. And I think it's important for policymakers who are really tasked with making very complex decisions, whether it's at the city scale or national scale, to understand that often the trade-offs that y'all are making does put you in a very, very difficult position to make the right decisions. And what we have found within LCA is that there's always, there tends to be a trade-off between theory and practice. There is a lot of truth, there's a lot of myth, and the criteria that I used are very, very hard to measure. But also more importantly, the tool has been used and misused to promote more single-use plastics. So the LCAs basically will tell you the answers based on the questions that you frame. And so far what we have seen, and we've done a lot of the analysis into the companies that are using LCAs, is that they tend to look at very, very specific questions, but then the answers tend to be extrapolated. So it is not the problem in the questions per se, but when policymakers apply the results and the findings, it is very important for us to understand the context in which that question was asked. Moreover, I think it's very important for us to understand what are some of the assumptions that are actually being made with respect to what we are observing in reality. Do the LCAs really take into account how much plastic is actually leaking into the environment and causing marine and terrestrial pollution and some of the impacts that we're seeing on our own local communities? So, of course, I think we need to step back. We need to question some of these assumptions when we use a tool like LCA. LCAs are also highly technical. They have several criteria that are used to run such analysis. And sometimes these studies really are not suitable for public consumption. And what we tend to see is that even though we do have a good LCA, a full report, what is served to policymakers is a very small slice of that pie. And what the media reports in the public domain is really the top key findings. And so I think having a very good understanding, having good experts that help you sort of interpret both the assumptions as well as the findings is very, very critical when we use the results. And I think lastly, what we have found at the Break Free from Plastic movement is this, we tend to forget that it's really sometimes a comparison between, do we want single-use plastic or do we want biodegradable plastic? So long as we are clear that we're comparing certain things, LCAs can serve that purpose. But sometimes as a policymaker, what you may need to do is actually step back and say, is that really the question we want to ask? Or can we say that we're not just comparing two kinds of materials, but what if we change the entire system? What if the question really was, it's not just which material is better, but how can we actually make reusable possible? How can we make that really, cost-effective, climate-friendly, and most importantly, I think Southeast Asian countries have a lot of traditional, very rich reusable solutions that already exist. We don't need to do very much rather than just make these possible to exist at a larger scale. Shifting gears, so sometimes it's a blind spot, but sometimes we really are misusing a tool. And I think something that we have been seeing with the global conversation on single-use plastics and plastic pollution has been that recycling is possible. Yes, maybe sometimes recycling is possible, but in the century that we've been using plastic, only 9% of all of the plastic produced has actually really been recycled. So while something may be theoretically possible, I think it's very important for us to ask, has this really been done in reality? So what, recyclable and recycling and recycled.
Satyarupa, you went on mute, I think.
Yes.
for a really long time? Or have you been hearing some of the
Just
slides?
the last
No,
sentence.
we heard until recyclable, recycled, and recycling.
Okay. So I wanted to just focus on this image a little bit. The amount of fossil fuels that we have used to actually create plastic is very, very high in compared to how much plastic actually gets recycled. And the process of recycling is highly energy intensive. It has a lot of carbon emissions. There's extreme toxicity. And in reality, very, very little plastic actually gets recycled. So this is really what I wanted to say and move into this quote by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is really where the large FMCGs are making these global commitments. And this is really that there has been very limited progress on reducing the need for single-use packaging altogether. Progress on shifting towards reusable packaging is limited, and elimination efforts remain focused on a relatively small set of materials and formats. So I wanted to share a little bit on a report we've actually written this year, where we've actually analyzed some of these top companies, FMCGs, and the initiatives that they've undertaken. We've looked at 265 such projects across the world. 214 are directly initiated by these companies, the 7 companies that you see on the right side of the screen, and 51 indirect projects, which were by alliances and group initiatives, of which these companies are a part of. This is based on information collected from 21 countries across the world on all of the projects. We have written to the 7 companies. We received partial responses back from 6 and none from any of the alliances. So what we observe really is we actually see that about 85% of these 265 projects are what we would call false solutions. Now, false solutions are what we are saying is unproven at scale technology, which means that these are really pilot projects. They're very small, and many of them have been announced and then nothing happens, or they run for a year with a lot of fanfare and they're closed. Or that there is third-party collect and dispose. There's a false narrative around the messaging, such as, for instance, cleaning up a beach is really the end to the plastic pollution crisis, which it is not. When we clean up a beach, that plastic has to go somewhere. So these are what we call false solutions. The full report I could share with you, but what we are observing really is 85% of them are what we would count as false solutions. In comparison, 14.7% are what we call reuse-based alternative delivery systems. So ADS really, what we are seeing is while they're great, what happens is that most of them are pilots. So 25 of them are pilots, some of them were expanded, but only 6 of them were deployed at scale. In terms of actually looking at how these companies have actually fared when they have launched these projects, these false solutions, we're actually seeing that a lot of them are actually doing really badly, and they tend to exacerbate the problem of plastic waste. And this is really one slide that I want to talk about very, very specifically in Asia. What we see is the prevalence of sachets. This is not something that we see in the global north. The same companies manufacture and sell the same products, but they are packaged in sachets for Asia. This is such a striking symbol of wasteful design that we see in our countries. Across India, where I'm based, we are seeing that a lot of these sachets are used to sell the same products. Often they are more expensive if you buy a larger than when you buy a larger package format. And this definitely is something that companies can phase out. They can, reuse options exist, and it's really about putting more pressure on FMCGs to use reuse solutions. What happens with a product like sachets is it's been designed to really use only one time. It's designed in such a poor manner that you can only tear a package, and then it's very hard to collect. All of our waste pickers and communities that are involved in even collection are unable to collect sachets. And so what we have found, and Reuters has done a very, very specific report on this, is that we are finding big brands actually promoting cement kilns in our countries. And cement kilns, unfortunately, are I mean, cement as a material is I think, a really bad industry in terms of emissions. And sending plastic to cement kilns actually just makes the problem so terrible. What we are seeing is that there are cement producers and then more sort of chemical recycling that's being promoted across the world with terrible impacts. So these are established impacts. What we have found is there is a lot of bioaccumulation of plastics as well as the chemicals from these plastics, whether they are in the landfill, whether they are burnt in cement kilns or in any form of incineration. And we have found evidence that it's in cheese, in milk, in water, in salt, in honey, in fish. In Indonesia, for instance, this has severely affected the population of the fish. The gender of the fish changes, affecting food security of a country. So, I think we really need to be careful with this material. It's not about just disposal. It's really about whether or not we really need to use this. And it's not just in wildlife. Plants have already been observed to have absorbed microplastics, nanoplastics, and the chemicals that are in plastics. Research has already shown that carrots, potatoes, apples, pears, some very, very common fruits and vegetables have absorbed the chemicals in plastics. And there is also evidence to show that we are accumulating this in our bodies. Both men and women, these cause endocrine disruption, which means that plastics and the chemicals in plastics tend to mimic hormones like thyroid, affecting the functioning of our bodies. It affects the reproductive system. It affects neurological systems. And this, even one pregnant woman can carry this on for 2 more generations. So we are saying that a woman today may conceive a child that's whose child, so that's the 3rd generation from today, may be already exposed to some of the chemicals that are present in plastics. And I really want to conclude with this quote that we can very much eliminate, I think, plastic production. We need to stop production. Asia has a very, very rich and diverse set of reuse options. It is really for policymakers such as yourselves to encourage this, to create a very enabling environment for these delivery models to succeed. And I think we can definitely work with FMCGs in our region to offer these reuse solutions. We don't have to limit them to only traditional products. Even FMCG products can be packaged and delivered differently. And I think, as Siddharth also said earlier, I think we must stay clear of other false solutions such as biodegradable and bio-based plastics. These have already caused a lot of disruptions in our countries when it comes to land diversion, but also, for instance, from India. This is a very real example. Our food security has been badly impacted. Bioplastics and biodegradable plastics require large-scale monocultures, and diversion of food from food to production of a single-use product, which is used for less than 5 seconds, maybe. So I urge policymakers such as yourselves to really consider how we use a tool like NCAs, but also, I think, question whether we need single-use plastics when we have such great reuse options. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Satyarupa. Very enlightening and informative. If you, dear participants, please leave your questions in the chat box while waiting for the next speaker. Sorry that this request for being admitted keep on popping up. Please bear with us. We try to rectify it for our next workshop. So let's move on with our next speaker. He will be presenting on assessment of packaging sustainability, key aspects, conflicting goals and methods. We welcome Dr. Eric Bauer, consultant at Sphera Solutions, Germany.
Okay, hello. Yes, thank you for inviting me to this event. and I would like to share my screen now. Wait. Okay. Do you all see my screen? The Sphera slide? Okay. So just as a short introduction, I work as a consultant for environmental sustainability for a company called Sphera, which offers environmental health and safety, risk management, product stewardship, consulting services, software, and data. And I just finished this year my PhD at the Technical University of Vienna in Austria, because I'm from Austria, about packaging sustainability. Yeah, so this is my company, Sphera, and it's based in, the headquarters in Chicago, and also a very important office is in Stuttgart in Germany, but I also have a lot of colleagues from India working for Sphera. So let's go on, and we have a lot of big clients, and I don't want to talk too much about this. What are we offering? Consulting means we do, let's say, classical LCA studies, life cycle assessment for customers. We offer data. We have a big sustainability database with life cycle assessment data. And we also offer software, which allows you to calculate life cycle assessments on your own. Okay, and today I want to talk a little bit about packaging sustainability, and I want to basically present you the findings from two of my publications I published in the course of my university studies. And let's start with some very general aspects. Sustainable packaging is now really a big issue, and it's driven by different trends. There's this war on plastic, where Satya Rupa just told us a lot about this war on plastic. And in the center, so I'm from Europe, from Austria and the European Union, and there we have very strong regulation on recycling rates. So in the EU, regulation is the main driver, because companies are now forced to make the packaging more recyclable. And of course, there's a lot of pressure from consumers, from media, and from NGOs. Yeah, and there's also a ban of different packaging types. So we have now in the European Union this Single-Use Plastics Directive banning certain types of packaging. So, and on a very general level, packaging sustainability has different aspects, and the three key aspects of packaging sustainability is packaging itself, which means the environmental impacts directly caused by production, use, and disposal of packaging. And this is covered by the classical LCA, but it doesn't give you the full picture, because then we also have the issue of food waste. Food waste is a huge issue. It's a very serious concern, and it is partly also caused by poor packaging. So this would be the packaging-related food waste, which is also a key aspect of packaging sustainability. And then we have the aspect of circularity. Circularity means how does it contribute to a circular economy, recycling rates, use of recycled content, and so on. Okay, and let's have a little bit a closer look into these three aspects of packaging sustainability. So let's start with the environmental impacts directly caused by production, use, and disposal of packaging. So the method to assess this is the classic life cycle assessment. And I just want to say something what Ms. Satya Rupa said. I fully agree that life cycle assessment and the findings of life cycle assessments are often misused by media and policy makers, and they are sometimes even used as a tool for greenwashing. But the life cycle assessment itself, it's still the gold standard for assessing environmental sustainability. I mean, I know very well about the shortcomings of LCA, but it's still the gold standard. We do not have anything better. Yeah, and here, cradle to grave means if you want to understand the environmental impacts, you have to look at the whole life cycle, starting from the raw material extraction to the final disposal of the product. The environmental impact assessed with LCA are, for example, climate change, acidification, water use, particulate matter, and many more. But as the first speaker today also mentioned, some very important impacts are not covered by standard LCAs, including littering and biodiversity loss. So for biodiversity loss, which is in my opinion one of the most pressing issues, and it's especially important if you use bio-based materials. So I would say land use is the best proxy, because land use and the destruction of habitats is the #1 driver for biodiversity loss. And for littering, yes, we did at the university. A colleague of mine thought about publishing something about this to kind of create a methodology to assess the littering probability. Because if you have packaging, you can see, okay, does it have small parts or is it very lightweight? And there are certain design issues which make it very prone to be littered. But as said, it's not captured in classical and standard LCA. Yeah, the next very important aspects and a very underrated aspect, and this is maybe the key aspect of packaging sustainability, is packaging related food waste. I mean, as you are probably aware of, according to the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, 1/3 of all food is lost or wasted, which means this is really a huge problem we have. And these losses are, of course, not all caused by packaging, but a certain amount of this food waste is due to poor packaging. So I said food waste is a serious concern, and it's sometimes caused by inadequate packaging. And reasons for packaging related food waste include under-packaging, poor protection against oxygen, microbes, mechanical damage, and so on. And at the consumer's home, if a packaging is hard to empty, that's also a problem and leads to a lot of food waste. If it's not resealable, or packaging size too big, that's a concern of often heard that people say, well, I buy something in the supermarket, but I just can't consume everything because the packaging size is too big. And this leads to a conflict of interest, because in a lot of cases, more packaging and even more plastic could help to reduce packaging-related food losses and therefore be beneficial. Yeah, and then we have this aspect of circularity, the contribution of a packaging to a circular economy. And what means circular? The key concept are the cyclic material flows, which you see on the right side of this figure. You have on the input side renewable content or recycled content, or in the best case reused components. And at the output is either composted, recycled, or prepared for reuse. And then you could close this material cycle. Please be aware that the circular packaging is not automatically environmentally friendly. The classical example is that of lightweight plastic bottles versus glass bottles. Glass bottles, for example, single-use glass bottles, the material itself is very circular. But if you look at the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, you see that single-use glass is one of the worst packagings that you can think of, because it's so energy intense. So, okay, you cycle the material, but at what costs? You need to burn a lot of natural gas to melt this glass again. And so it's circular, but not necessarily sustainable. Okay, and here I want to share some findings from my study. So I did one study, which I also published, about flexible packaging for bacon and block, so meat packaging. And this is the graphical abstract showing, I examined 6 different packaging for meat. From left to right, these are 2 different kind of thermoformed films, 2 different vacuum bags, and 2 different shrink films. And what you see, the blue bars are carbon footprint, and the orange bars are packaging weight. And what you can easily see is that the environmental impacts of packaging are largely correlated to packaging weight, which is quite obvious, the finding. I mean, it's not always the case. What I found is that PA is a very energy intense material. Yeah, and let's go on to the next slide. These are the results for the climate change, the absolute results. And the second bar from the left, 1B, is a recyclable packaging. And you see 70 grams of CO2 equivalent versus 26 for the 3A, the very lightweight shrink pack. So you see lightweighting brings more benefit than recycling. And then I had a closer look at this recyclable packaging, the 1B. I did a scenario or sensitivity analysis, and I calculated the standard scenario. You might wonder, what I did for the standard scenario, I assumed 0% recycling. Why? Now you might ask, you just told me it's recyclable. Yes, it is recyclable, but the study I did refers to the situation in Austria, and such packaging types are incinerated. So the producer claims it's recyclable, and yes, that's nice, that's fine, but in practice, it goes to waste incineration. So I said, well, I want to be as close to reality as possible. So I send it to the incineration in the study. But I also calculated what you see on the right side, the best case scenario where I say the packaging is completely recycled, which just means 72%, because the output after the recycling process, it's never 100%. You have large losses of material, and of course you have large losses of quality after recycling. So even in the very best case, you come down to 51 grams of CO2 equivalents versus, look at the bar, the second from the right, 3A, 26, which is a lightweight packaging, but non-recyclable. So what's the problem? The recyclable packaging, first of all, it's not recycled in practice. And even if you have to make it so heavy, because you need to use more or less a monomaterial, which does not have this great barrier properties. So in this case, it showed that in meat packaging, going for recyclable packaging is maybe not the best thing to do. It does not bring the biggest benefits. And the key conclusions from this study were, I also did a calculation on the environmental impact of meat, and of course, the environmental impacts of packaged meat are by far higher than environmental impacts of packaging. And eco-design of meat packaging must clearly focus on best possible food protection and food waste reduction. And weight reduction brings higher benefits than increased recyclability. In this case, you have to be always be aware that there are some general principles for packaging sustainability, but you always need to decide on a case-by-case basis. And if you're interested, the slides will be shared. You find here the link to my study, which is free for download. Yeah, and then I also did a study where I modeled different packaging types, for example, an aluminum can, a plastic bag, and so on, with different life cycle databases to show, okay, everything I do is the same. I just exchange the data sets in the background. And there are three main providers. So Gabi is what we provide. It's Sphera. EF means Environmental Footprint Database from the European Commission. And Econvent is a Swiss database provider, quite a big one. And this comparison showed that for climate change, the results are more or less comparable. And yeah, but there are some methodological issues with water use, for example. And if we go to the next example, yeah, plastic bag. Yeah, this is a good example. Here you see for Econvent, the results are always higher. They are sometimes even significantly higher. Why is this? Because they use other methods to model their data sets. They have their system boundaries are different. And this leads to different results. So I unfortunately don't have more time. So I want to quickly go through the key conclusion of this study. The use of different LCA databases can lead to different results. So please never ever compare results from one study with results from another study. You can only fairly compare it if you model two products with exactly the same software database and with the same methodological approach. And the reasons are, different modeling of background system, different system boundaries, different assumptions. So that means these differences another problem. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's just you need to really understand what's behind it. There are different approaches. But sometimes I even found errors. So I tried to figure out where these differences come from. And in some cases, I found, well, simple errors. Yes, and LCA practitioners must be able to assess the quality of used data sets. So this is really key to be able to interpret LCA results, an understanding of the background data sets and of the assumptions used. And this is the link to this study, the influence of database selection on environmental impact results. Yeah, and so, and finally, just give me 3 seconds. We also offer a tool which is called the Gabe Packaging Calculator, which is a very easy to use online tool which allows for the easy calculation of packaging life cycle results even for non-experts. And yeah, feel free to contact me if you have any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eric Power. So thanks for your sharing, and I think your research information is very useful for our participants today. So now that we have had our first half, 3 presenters presenting their studies and analysis, and also there are lots of analysis in the actual environment. So let's move on to the question and answer session. So let's see how we could share our knowledge today. So we have this question in the chat from Miss I don't know, Mr. or Miss Asmu Wahyu, on this how we could use biomass to be a bio-based product, packaging product. So we do have feedback from Siddharth in the chat box, but Siddharth, maybe you can also explain here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. I've written our position on this topic in the chat box as well. But again, to repeat what I've already written, I think I will be very careful with because there's a lot of hype right now when it comes to like bio-based materials and their impact. And even if you look at the LCA studies, I mean, it's quite clear that they are definitely not the solution for littering, and they have severe environmental impacts, which are even higher than the fossil-based materials. So that's one thing. The second is, of course, I mean, we should not forget the discussion fuel versus food, which has been going on for many years. We know that, and so if the land is and the crops can be used for food production, they should not be diverted for the production of for production of an alternative to a fossil-based fast-moving consumer good or a material for fast-moving consumer good, because at the end of the day, we are diverting the land for something for which we already have other better solutions. I mean, there's reusable options, which we have been talking about. I think Satyarupa also mentioned that in her presentation, are definitely better off. Also, if you look at the biodiversity loss aspects, for instance, but also other aspects like littering. So to the question specifically, I would say that yes, I mean, compostable material, or let's say compostable packaging or bags is used in some parts of the world, for example, also in Italy, to separate wet waste from dry waste, because but that is where we will say is the only currently feasible or recommendable option, so that it helps in achieving the better segregation at source. But that also requires a close look at how your waste management structure looks like in the city, in the town, the country. Because, for example, the city where I live in, it's quite clearly mentioned by the waste company that that they are not able to, that even using the biodegradable bag for collection of organic waste creates a problem in their recycling processes, because they have to take it out and manually. It costs time, it costs money. So in other cities, it's more possible. They welcome that. In Italy, it's happening. So that's the only thing I would recommend. And then one more point is that if there is an agricultural waste, for instance, so rather than burning it, in many countries, for example, also in India, but also in Southeast Asia, the waste is normally burnt to get the land clear for the next crop. So rather than doing that, that can be used as the material for the production of, let's say, for example, compostable or, for example, garbage bags, for instance, but not the land which is primarily meant for, let's say, food production, for instance. I don't know if I covered everything. Otherwise, maybe Satyarupa, you want to add something to that?
So I think the second question, so who's going to answer this? Because it doesn't has, the question was not directed specifically to the speaker. So maybe any of you? Miss Satya?
Sure, I could attempt, and then maybe Sid can fill in. I think it's important to think about whether single-use plastic has really provided the kind of convenience and cost benefits that it aims to or claims to provide. And I think it's probably not as difficult to provide reuse solutions. Like I said, reuse solutions are actually quite prevalent across Asia Pacific. And I think what we really need to do is create the enabling conditions. So, for instance, something very, very specific that we've observed in many of the Southeast Asian countries is creating legislation that sets safety and hygiene standards for reusable packaging is something that could actually encourage businesses to right away opt for reusable packaging. So some of the companies that we have actually interviewed have said the absence of such a legislation is not is prevents them from using some of these solutions because they are not sure what would their liability be, right? So
You are muted, or we lost a connection. Yeah. So maybe while waiting for Miss Satyarupa, that's this next question from Miss Dorothy. Maybe we can also ask Mr. Eric or Siddharth to take this question. Oh yeah, you're.
Yeah. Okay, so for recyclable packaging, what innovations? Yeah, there are different trends. So one big trend in the packaging industry is to go for mono-material because, as I already explained, for meat packaging, you usually have multi-layer packaging where you combine different plastic materials which are very thin and have different properties like good oxygen barrier, good barrier against water vapor, good mechanical stability, and so you can create very good packaging with very high protective function with multi-layer structures, but of course they're definitely not recyclable. And one solution they're working on is to switch to monomaterials, which would make it recyclable. But this, of course, is a problem for the barrier functions, which are key. And again, I like to stress that the protection of the food is clearly the most important aspect of packaging in this regard, but they're about to develop new barrier layers like very thin coating with aluminum oxide or silicon oxide, which are in nanometers thin layers, which still provide some barrier properties, but do not interfere with recycling. It's so small and so thin, this barrier layer, that it can still be recycled. So to go for monomaterials and just add a ultra thin and super thin barrier layer. So this is one trend, and another.
Sorry, Mr. Eric. I think in the interest of the time, since we are having another 2 more presentations after this,
Okay.
we can let Ms. Satyarupa to wrap up her explanation, and you can always put your input in the chat box for the others to answer. So sorry to cut you through, but yes, Ms.
No problem.
Satyarupa, yeah.
My apologies. I agree with what Eric was just saying at the end. It's really
I think I think you should also leave your feedback in chat box, Miss Satyarupa, since your internet is extremely shaky today. So let's move on for our next second half of our series dialogues. We will start with a presentation on this topic, practice in material packaging selection based on LCA analysis. So we welcome Mr. Vivekanand Sistra. He's the research and development. Sorry. Yeah. Mr. Vivek Anand Sisla, Research and Development Director, Head of Unilever, Southeast Asia and Australia, is it? And Site Leader, Unilever Thailand. Yeah, please, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jeshi. And thank you.
May I request, I mean, is it possible for you to switch on your camera so that we can see you? There you are. Yeah, thank you.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me
Yes,
okay?
yes, we could hear you.
Good afternoon, Jayshree, and thank you to your team for the opportunity to share some of our thoughts today. So I'll talk to you. I work in R&D, research and development with Unilever in Southeast Asia. We have a dedicated packaging team in this part of the world looking at different material solutions and different ways of analyzing the value of our solutions from a consumer perspective as well as an environmental perspective.
Tan San Dos, he is the head of packaging from Nestle Thailand. He's going to present to us on how Nestle is making packaging choices based on life cycle assessments. Yeah, please, Mr.
Okay, so
Giraffe.
I'm sharing from my screen then.
Okay, sure.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, yeah, we could see your screen, but you need to make it full screen, yeah?
Okay.
Okay, all good.
Is it work now?
Yeah, it's working.
Yes, can see.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes.
Yep. So hi everyone. I'm Jirapat. So I'm the head of the packaging department for the Nestle Indochina. So let me represent my company today to talk about what we do on the material choices for the sustainable packaging. But before I start, our company is starting from Mr. Henri Nestle, back around more than 150 years ago, because he has a dream that he want to solve the pain point back then, that the students have the malnutrition. So that's why he created the first product, because he believed that everyone have the opportunity to get a good food in order to get a good life, and that is our company tagline so far. So our role for the company is that we exist to unlock the power of the food to enhance the quality of life for everyone, including this little one, for today and generations to come. And I think the highlight here is that, for the generations to come, that is our company mission as well, because we want to protect the world where we are today and for the next generations. So that's why we have launched the commitment. I think it's same as the other companies like Unilever, that we want to achieve the net zero emission. And I can share you the video here because it's a summary of what we are going to do. Let me know if you can't hear the sound.
ด้วยปัญหาการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศที่ทวีคูณเนสเล่ตระหนักถึงความสำคัญในการมีส่วนร่วมแก้ไขปัญหาดังกล่าวเราจึงมุ่งมั่นสร้างความยั่งยืนเพื่อไปสู่เป้าหมายลดการปล่อยก๊าซเรือนกระจกสุทธิจนเหลือศูนย์ภายในปี 2050 เพื่อส่งต่อโลกที่น่าอยู่ให้กับคนรุ่นต่อไป
For more than 150 years, Nestle has been a good food, good life company, and we believe it is our responsibility to provide the world with tastier and healthier products. With intensifying challenges facing the planet today in climate change and environmental threats such as the degradation of forests, land, soil, and waterways, there is impact on the accessibility and availability of high quality and nutritious food. We have to tackle this. This is why we have established a sustainability roadmap where we will take concrete actions throughout our value chain to ensure sustainable food production to create a better Thailand and a better world for future generations.
เนสเล่ประเทศไทยได้เริ่มดำเนินการใน 4 ด้านหลักเพื่อไปสู่เป้าหมาย Net Zero ในปี 2050 เราคิดค้นนวัตกรรมบรรจุภัณฑ์ที่เป็นมิตรต่อสิ่งแวดล้อมไม่ว่าจะเป็นการเปลี่ยนมาใช้หลอดกระดาษโค้งงอได้ซองกระดาษบรรจุภัณฑ์โมโนสตรัคเจอร์กระป๋องอลูมิเนียม 100% และลดการใช้พลาสติกผลิตใหม่เพื่อไปสู่เป้าหมายในการเปลี่ยนบรรจุภัณฑ์ให้สามารถรีไซเคิลได้ 100% และลดการใช้พลาสติกผลิตใหม่ลง 1 ใน 3 ภายในปี 2025 เนสเล่มุ่งมั่นดูแลทรัพยากรน้ำอย่างยั่งยืนทั้งในโรงงานและชุมชนรอบข้างเช่นการพัฒนาน้ำในคลองขนมจีนจังหวัดอยุธยาให้มีคุณภาพดีขึ้นและโรงงานผลิตน้ำดื่มทั้ง 2 แห่งของเนสเล่ยังได้มาตรฐานการดูแลและจัดการทรัพยากรน้ำอย่างยั่งยืนจาก AWS เราส่งเสริมการจัดหาวัตถุดิบที่มีคุณภาพอย่างยั่งยืนและเป็นมิตรต่อสิ่งแวดล้อมเริ่มตั้งแต่กระจายต้นกล้ากาแฟที่ดีพร้อมให้ความรู้แก่เกษตรกรในการปลูกการดูแลดินเพื่อฟื้นฟูความอุดมสมบูรณ์ของดินและสร้างผลผลิตอย่างยั่งยืนพร้อมอบรมและสนับสนุนเกษตรกรผู้เลี้ยงโคนมเพื่อยกระดับมาตรฐานฟาร์มพัฒนาคุณภาพและปริมาณน้ำนมดิบเนสเล่ได้คิดหาแนวทางประหยัดพลังงานประหยัดน้ำและลดการปล่อยก๊าซเรือนกระจกทั้งภาคการผลิตและการขนส่งสินค้าปัจจุบันทุกโรงงานของเราไม่มีขยะฝังกลบและยังริเริ่มใช้พลังงานแสงอาทิตย์เพื่อเดินหน้าสู่เป้าหมายในการใช้พลังงานหมุนเวียน 100% ภายในปี 2025 เนสเล่พร้อมดูแลและฟื้นฟูสิ่งแวดล้อมบนเส้นทางแห่ง Regeneration เพื่อโลกที่ยั่งยืนและเพื่อคนรุ่นถัดไป
Yep. So I think that's a wrap for our global. Actually our ambition for Nestle to achieve the net zero. So it's as you probably saw the word regeneration. This is actually what Nestle is taking now. That what we are working on any sustainable project is toward this concept of the regeneration, which is the
1 second. Let me mute everyone, and then you unmute yourself again. Okay.
okay.
Okay. Please unmute yourself and speak.
Okay. Okay. Yep. So the concept of the regeneration is what we are taking as the approach now, that is actually go beyond the sustainability because we want to help protect, renew, and restore. So this is what we're gonna work across all the subject for the sustainability. And as you saw in the video, that packaging is one part of the journey to deliver the net zero emission for Nestle company. So let's focus more on what we're gonna do for the sustainable packaging. Yep. So if I may summarize what we're going to do on the sustainable packaging, that we have commitments by 2025, we are actually working on two things. One is to deliver to convert all our packaging to be 100% recyclable. And second, we want to reduce the virgin plastic by 1/3. So these are the our main commitments on the sustainable packaging. Actually, on the 100% recyclable packaging, as of today, we already achieved 90% of the recyclable packaging. So actually, Nestle Thailand is the market that actually initiate the monostructure laminate film. So before, we have the laminate film that use the PP, PE, and with the PET or alu. But we have the invent the new structure that have only polyolefin, so PP and PE. So to be able to make it recyclable. So Thailand is the first market in Nestle worldwide that create this structure, and we start to roll out. So that's why, you know, we have the plan to roll out to all the product in the coming years. So I think this one is one of the achievement that we have for Nestle Thailand, in particular to represent the Nestle overall worldwide as well, that, you know, we have the solution for the laminate film already. Moving to the reduce the virgin plastic by 1/3, our key strategies are working on four things. Number one is to reduce the packaging size, weight, or the dimension. As you may know that, you know, once we reduce, this one will help reduce the virgin plastic immediately. Second, we can reduce the virgin plastic by using the alternative materials like paper or the aluminum. Third, we can use the recycled plastic. And fourth, we also looking at the what we call alternative delivery system, or it means the reuse or the refill. So I have the example to show you later on. So these are the four key strategies. But I think it's the questions now is that, okay, we know that we need to reduce the virgin plastic, but we have four choices here. How are we gonna make a choice? So that Nestle have established what we call the golden rules for all the packaging. You know, when we decide the packaging, we need to go through all these principles, all the rules actually. So number one, what we need to look at is the in terms of the sustainability performance. So in particular for this one, that when we use the LCA to help how we assess which packaging that we're gonna choose. Second, we need to look at the holistically in terms of the value chain as well, to consider what is going to happen in the supply chain or in the factory. For example, our pallet footprint need to be more than 95%, so that when we decide the packaging, you know, this one need to be taken into account as well. Third, we need to think about can we use the recycled content or not. But this one is subject to the you know, law or legals in each country. For example, in Thailand, you know, this one is still not allowed for the food contact yet. And fourth, we need to look into the infrastructure and technology in the market. So we need to understand what is the waste collection and sorting and the recycling factory or facilities in Thailand. Like for myself and my team, I have been visiting to the dump site, like, almost 5 times already. So we need to go and to learn, what packaging will be end up in the landfill, for example. So this is the knowledge that every packaging need to have nowadays for our company. And last, how we can engage with the consumer. How can we communicate that, this type of the packaging, how the consumer will do or handle with it after they already finish the consumption. So these are the 5 golden rules that we need to consider when we select the packaging. And the tools that Nestle use internally, I think similar to other companies. So we have 4 pillars here. Number 1 is starting from when we decide the product. We need to discuss already with the brand team and the multifunctional team on, the concept of the packaging and any impact to the sustainability and the manufacturing footprint. Second, we use the pack score. So this one is just like newly introduced to help easier to identify that the impact of that particular packaging in terms of the climate impact, recycling, and the reusability. Third, we use the packaging system modeling. This one is very new for us as well. So we're still learning on this one. But moving to the last one, the Ecodex. This one is the simple version of the LCA that we use internally. We have done so far. And actually this one we have, because Nestle have a lot of the research centers worldwide. So they have done the database for this one. And for Nestle, it's actually quite simple that, when they have done the database, so they have published the guideline for every market to follow. I just give the example one case that, like from those tools that we use to analyze. This is the case study when we have to considering the change from the plastic bag into the paper bag for the product in Europe, Quick. So we look at the impact on in terms of the material, producing of the material itself, the conversion of the material and the end of life. So we give the score that the impact to the greenhouse gas, and then we identify that actually moving to paper in that particular market does help to reduce the greenhouse gas, because as you might know that paper actually might create more greenhouse gas when we move to the paper packaging, because sometimes it create more weight. We need to use more paper or grammage when compared to plastic. So you can see the comparing between the plastic versus paper bag that have the same grammage versus when we change from the shrink film for the water multi-pack into the shipping case. Shipping case have more greenhouse gas impact, for example. Yep. So this kind of the analysis that we have done in our company. And as I mentioned that, this
Mr.
one we have.
Yep. Sorry for interrupting. I hope that you can wrap up soon because on the interest of time. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this is what we have created for each type of the material that, like for plastic, what can we use or what we cannot use. For example, like PVC, PVDC, Nestle will not use at all. Or if we use, we need have to have the plan to phase out. Yep. And we also have detail for, which type of the plastic, which material that we can use. So this is the guideline that our company, when we decide the packaging, we can follow. Yep. I have a lot of examples here, but I think at the interest of time, I cannot go through every examples here. But I think you have a deck and you can look at it in the link that you can download the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jirafat. Sorry for cutting you through, but yep. I hope that we can use this good. We are already almost 4 p.m., so we can use this time for a short discussion for the question and answer. Yeah. So, so we already have a couple of questions in the chat box. So maybe we can quickly use some of these questions to be discussed here. Okay, so let me just go through some questions here. First for Mr. Sisla. So there is a question here on what's Unilever's stand on using non-food contact PCR for personal home care products. And then he also asked about any EPR programs within Unilever. So maybe you can address quickly and shortly.
Okay, so
Thank
let me
you.
quickly answer the first one. The answer is yes. We are open to using non-food contact PCR. The important thing is that the products must be safe for the consumer. So it must pass a migration test, and it must pass the other tests that we have, for example, odor migration. So as long as the quality of the PCR is good and made in a good quality plant, we're very happy to use non-food for non-food applications. And we hope there will be more of that in the years to come, especially in Southeast Asia, where right now we don't have availability of good quality yet, but it's coming soon. On EPR programs, Unilever supports EPR. There are EPR policies, that are coming up in different parts of the world. Some we already participate in. In Southeast Asia, these are work in progress. Our views on EPR for Southeast Asia is that it should be end to end. From producers all the way to retail, there should be an allocation across the chain. There should also be incentives in the EPR for the use of recycled plastic and disincentives for not having recyclable content. We should make it specific to the market and the challenges we have. It should not be one size fits all or imported kind of EPR solution.
So then they also ask you more questions. So is there like any examples where you
Yes.
found challenges in switching to paper-based product? And
Yes.
so under your
Okay, so I know Mr. Wazirani had sent a question. I replied briefly on the chat.
Oh, okay.
These are quite
maybe
technical questions, so I'll give my email as well in the chat for any follow-up questions because it's a bit of a technical discussion. Happy to take any more. I'll put my email on the chat. Yeah.
Okay, so then, thanks a lot. Then maybe we can move to Mr. Jirafat. So there's a question regarding your explanation that the reduction of 1/3 of your virgin plastic. So they want to confirm whether this is overall reduction target or will the 1/3 will be replaced by other materials. And then on your definitions. So this is from Eco Institute by Miss Clara. Yeah.
Yeah, for the first one, the reduce to 1/3. Yes, the 1/3 will be either we reduce the weight of the product, of the packaging, or the dimension, so that will help. Or if we cannot reduce the pack size, then we will go with the other materials like PCR or like paper, for example.
Okay, thank you so much. So then we also have a different question from Christopher. When you say that by 2020 you have already achieved this 90% recyclable packaging target, how does your organization define recyclable? Yeah.
Okay, actually for that one I have to put, maybe you have to clarify more. That one is mean that we convert the packaging to be designed for recycle. So it's mean that some market might not have the facility to recycle, but once they have, then it can take it it can send to the recycle facility. But as of now, we changed our material that it will be it can be recycled when we have the facility. Yep, like change to the mono material.
Okay, so
This is the last one.
Yeah, we have this last question again for you, Jirafat, Mr. Jirafat. So this is, do you have any plans of collaborating for peers pre-competitive studies? Maybe work together with Unilever, Nestle, or PNG and Gamble. Yeah. So together. So any ideas there? And then lobby to work as a single voice. Yeah.
We have the platform that all the companies come together to work on this one, to work on the same objective. I think this one is what the work is going on. Yep.
Okay, so nice to hear that we also have something similar already in Malaysia. We have this PRO set up by
same in Thailand.
organization called Maria. Yeah, so we are in the same effort, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, is there any questions from the participants who has not asked in the chat box but would like to ask before I wrap up this our dialogue series for today? Okay, so before I conclude, yes, please see that we have already shared some of the links here. Most of our speakers also shared their emails here for you to like communicate bilaterally with them. So please make use of this opportunity. And we also have shared some of the studies, which is also available at our website. And very soon we will share the link to these presentations. We have recorded it and will put it in YouTube so that you can also view there. And also you could also see some of this material PPTs, PowerPoints in our website. So we hope that sorry again, apologies for this rushing, but then I know that many of you have spent your precious time to be with us, so we try to be on time. And again, thank you so much for our dear speakers for your time and great presentation today. There's so much of learning, so much of insights. There's lots of efforts from the private sector. I could see Unilever and Nestle. Even I noticed that Nestle Malaysia is also doing tremendous work. Also from the other side, like how Ms. Satya Rupa's presentation and Mr. Eric's presentation, we learned a lot as well. And of course, ECO's study also gives a lot of insights on how doing things right. So again, I really hope that our policymakers and researchers here today will, and also the private sectors, yeah, to make more informed decisions for the future. Thank you again. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and lastly, before I conclude, we have this link for feedback. Of course, you will put a feedback of these pop-up messages while presenting. We try to resolve that, but otherwise, let us know how else we could improve. Thank you. Yeah. So that's all.